The banquet hall lights glinted off the champagne flutes, reflecting a distorted version of me in every glass. Grace, across the table, laughed a little too loudly at a joke from her boss, her hand resting on the arm of a man I'd never seen before. When her gaze finally met mine, it was flat, devoid of warmth. "Oh, Mark," she said, a brittle smile forming. "You're still here?" 3 months had passed since I walked out of the house. Now I sat hunched over my laptop, the screen's blue light casting a cold glow on the temporary apartment's bare walls. The place was furnished with rental furniture, the kind designed for neutrality, not comfort. A single suitcase sat half unpacked in the corner, a silent testament to the impermanence of it all. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I was supposed to be updating my resume, reaching out to recruiters, but my mind kept drifting. I thought about the hospital, the sterile scent of antiseptic that always clung to my scrubs, the relentless beeping of monitors that once soundtracked my nights. I had started as an orderly, pushing gurneys, cleaning rooms. My father, a man who worked the same manufacturing job for 40 years, hadn't understood when I told him I was applying to nursing school. "It's hard, son, unpredictable," he'd said, his voice flat. He saw stability in steel-toed boots and a pension. I saw a different kind of purpose in the quiet, desperate rooms of the ICU. A healer's heart, they called it. I just called it showing up. My shift in the intensive care unit was a constant battle against the inevitable. There were moments of clarity, of small triumphs when a patient turned a corner, a flicker of life returning to eyes that had been vacant. And there were the heartbreaks, the whispered words of comfort to families watching life drain away, the feeling of a cold hand going colder in mine. It was a place where life and death were always in a fragile balance, and I was often the one holding the scale. It took everything out of you, but sometimes, in a quiet moment, it gave something back too. A sense of being truly present, truly vital. That's how I felt the morning I met Grace. It was 3 years ago, nearly 6 a.m. I had just clocked out after a double shift. The exhaustion, a heavy blanket draped over my shoulders. My body ached, my eyes burned, and the taste of bad coffee lingered. I stopped at the small, independent coffee shop on the edge of downtown, a place I rarely frequented. She was there, sitting at a small table by the window, sipping a latte. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her eyes, an unusual shade of green, met mine for a fleeting moment. I ordered my usual black coffee, feeling the tremor in my hands from too much adrenaline and too little sleep. She must have noticed the scrubs, or maybe the way I leaned against the counter, too tired to stand upright. She asked, "Long night?" Her voice was calm, clear. I grunted something unintelligible, probably. Then she asked about my work, about the ICU. She had a way of asking questions that wasn't intrusive but genuinely curious. I remember rambling, the words tumbling out, about the chaos and the quiet, the fear and the hope. "You have no idea," I remember saying, rubbing the back of my neck. She listened, her head tilted slightly. She said, "It sounds incredibly brave, what you do." I just shook my head. "It's not bravery," I corrected her. "It's just showing up, being present." I was captivated despite the fatigue, despite the fact that I probably looked like I'd been dragged through a hedge backward. Grace Miller, I learned, was 27, a client services manager at Rising Star Advertising. Her world seemed miles away from mine, all sleek offices and polished presentations. It was a world I'd only ever glimpsed in magazines. She wore a tiny compass tattoo on her left wrist, just below her thumb. "To keep me from losing my way," she'd explained, a small, self-aware smile touching her lips. The irony of that now felt like a dull ache. Our first date was at an Ethiopian restaurant, her suggestion. It wasn't fancy, just warm and inviting, with shared platters of injera and spicy stews. "I like that you didn't take me somewhere fancy to impress me," she'd said, tearing off a piece of bread. I hadn't even thought about it. I was just myself, tired and straightforward. That night, after dinner, we walked along the river under the Stone Arch Bridge. The city lights sparkled on the water, reflecting a softened version of the skyline. That's where we shared our first kiss. It wasn't explosive or dramatic, but it felt solid, real, like the start of something profound. Our contrasting worlds, I think, were part of the attraction. I was drawn to her ambition, her drive to climb the ladder, to make a name for herself. She saw her job at Rising Star as a stepping stone, a means to an end. "I want to own my own agency someday, Mark," she'd said, her eyes shining with a fierce determination I found both admirable and slightly daunting. She offered me a glimpse into a life of purpose, but one powered by different fuels. And perhaps I offered her a similar window into something else, something she hadn't known. A year after our first date, Grace and I found a two-bedroom apartment near downtown. It was on the third floor of a brick building with tall windows that looked out onto a canopy of old oak trees. Moving in felt like a natural progression, a quiet promise made without needing to say the words out loud. The second bedroom, but at the bedroom, meant perhaps for a guest or a future family, quickly became Grace's home office, a necessity as her work hours stretched longer and longer, often bleeding into the late evenings. Her desk was neat, a stark contrast to the creative chaos I imagined at her advertising agency. Those early days together, though, were special. Sunday mornings were sacred. We'd make pancakes from scratch, filling the apartment with the scent of maple syrup and coffee. After breakfast, we'd often drive out to Lake Minnetonka, find a quiet spot, and just sit by the water, skipping stones, talking about everything and nothing. It was during these times that I saw a different Grace, a softer, goofier side that rarely emerged during the week. She'd laugh at simple jokes, point out interesting cloud formations, or marvel at the intricate patterns in a fallen leaf. There was a childlike wonder in her, a delight in the small, everyday pleasures. "You know what I sometimes dream about, Mark?" she'd asked one afternoon, lying on a worn blanket by the lake, the sun warm on her face. Just chucking it all and moving to some tiny town, opening a little boutique agency, no big clients, no rat race, just honest work for local businesses. She closed her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. I believed her then. I really did. "We could do that," I'd said, reaching for her hand. "I can nurse anywhere, small town, big city, doesn't matter. We could make it work." The thought felt good, a quiet comfort. But come Monday morning, the dream would recede like the morning mist. Grace would be back in her warrior mode, as she called it. Her phone would start buzzing before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. Client acquisitions, pitches, beating out competitors. Those were the battle cries that filled our apartment. Her focus was sharp, unwavering. I admired that drive, that sheer ambition. I supported her in every way I knew how. I'd cook dinner for us most nights, knowing she'd come home exhausted. I'd listen to her vent about difficult clients or office politics, offering quiet empathy. And I celebrated her victories, big and small, with genuine pride. I was proud of her intelligence, her creativity, the way she could craft a narrative out of thin air. And I suppose I overlooked the subtle shifts, the tiny hairline cracks that were beginning to appear. About a year into living together, Grace's agency landed a major healthcare client. It was a huge win for them, a real stepping stone for her. I thought it would be a perfect opportunity for me to meet some of her colleagues, maybe go to a celebratory dinner. But she hesitated. "It's just that they're all marketing people," she'd explained, avoiding my gaze as she sorted through a pile of agency reports. "You might be bored with all the shop talk, Mark, all the jargon." Ma, I remember a faint prickle of unease then, a sensation like a tiny splinter under the skin. It wasn't just that one instance. I started noticing that she never really talked about my career to her colleagues. At agency functions, I was always Mark. Not Mark, my boyfriend, the ICU nurse. Just Mark. If someone, usually a curious spouse, asked directly what I did, Grace would offer a vague, almost dismissive answer. "Mark works in healthcare," she'd say, a little too quickly, then pivot the conversation, asking about their kids' soccer team or a new restaurant opening. It was like my profession was something to be skirted around, a topic best left untouched. The feeling of unease solidified into something heavier after a holiday party thrown by her agency. It was loud, glitzy, full of polished smiles and air kisses. I tried to engage, ask genuine questions, but the conversations always felt superficial, like skimming the surface of a highly waxed floor. I saw her catch the eye of a senior account director as I was explaining the difference between a trauma ICU and a cardiac ICU. The director's polite smile seemed to waver. Grace quickly interjected, pulling me away with a murmured, "Darling, let's get you another drink." Later that night, back in our quiet apartment, the lingering smell of cheap champagne clinging to my clothes, I confronted her. She was kicking off her heels, one by one, the click of each shoe hitting the hardwood floor echoing in the silence. "Do you have a problem with what I do for a living, Grace?" The question hung in the air, heavy and blunt. She sighed, a tampon drawn-out sound, and ran a hand through her hair. "It's complicated, Mark," she said, finally looking at me, her eyes tired. "In advertising, perception is everything. People make snap judgments about dating a nurse. It's just not the image we project." The words landed like small, cold stones. I felt it then, raw and undeniable. She was ashamed of me, ashamed of my honest, hands-on work. Grace had tried to soften the blow. "It's not about you, Mark," she'd insisted, her voice tight, a careful edge to her words. "It's about ambition levels, about drive, about where someone's headed in life." She'd even tried to reassure me, reaching for my hand across the breakfast table, saying she loved my groundedness. But the words felt hollow, a practiced speech. The seed of doubt, once a tiny speck, had now taken root. It was a cold, alien presence in my gut. I started noticing other things, small shifts that added up. Grace was working later, more often. Her energy, once shared freely between us, was now almost entirely directed outward, toward her clients, her pitches, her team. I'd come home from a grueling shift, the sterile smell of the hospital still clinging to my skin, and find the apartment empty. I'd cook dinner for one, the clatter of pots and pans sounding louder in the quiet space. Her side of the bed, once warm from her presence, grew cold more often than not as she stayed late at the office or went out with colleagues for networking dinners. She also started criticizing my simple joys, the things that had once drawn her in. My quiet evenings reading a book, my preference for a walk in the park over a crowded bar, my aversion to constant social events. "You need to network more, Mark," she'd say, scrolling through her phone, not really looking at me. "You need to dream bigger, reach for more." The words weren't said with malice, but with a kind of exasperated concern, as if I were somehow failing to live up to an unspoken expectation. She made me feel stagnant, like a still pond while she was a rushing river. Arguments became more frequent, often starting over trivial things, a misplaced remote, a forgotten errand, but quickly escalating into broader criticisms of my life choices, my perceived lack of ambition. I tried to defend myself to explain that my work, though not glamorous, was deeply fulfilling, but her eyes would glaze over. She seemed to be looking through me, past me, towards something I couldn't see. And then there was her phone. It became a fortress, always face down on the table, locked, never out of her sight. If I happened to glance at it, her hand would instinctively cover the screen. She started taking calls in the other room, her voice hushed, almost a whisper. "It's just Kevin from work," she'd say, emerging from the bedroom, her eyes darting away from mine. "Nothing important." The explanation felt too quick, too rehearsed. A cold dread began to settle in my stomach. Kevin. He was the young, ambitious account executive she'd mentioned once or twice, the one always pitching new ideas. I tried to push the feeling down, to rationalize it away. Work stress, I told myself. She's under immense pressure. But the coldness between us was undeniable, a growing chasm that widened with each passing day, even when we were physically close. I'd reach for her in bed and she'd stiffen slightly, her responses muted. I tried to bridge the gap. "Let's get away for a weekend, Grace," I suggested one Saturday morning, sunlight streaming through the windows. Just us, Lake Superior maybe, or a cabin in Wisconsin. I wanted to recapture those early days, the simplicity, the connection. But she always had a conflict. "I'm just really swamped right now, Mark. This is a crucial time for my career." Her eyes, even as she spoke, were already elsewhere, scanning the calendar on her laptop, mentally juggling deadlines and meetings. The excuse always felt valid on the surface, but the repetition hollowed it out. I kept trying to convince myself it was just work stress, that our love was strong enough to weather this storm, that this busy, driven woman was still the same person who delighted in simple pleasures, who dreamt of a small boutique agency. I looked at the small compass tattoo on her wrist. "To keep me from losing my way," she'd said. Now it seemed to mock me, a stark symbol of my growing unease, pointing not toward a clear path, but into a swirling fog. Grace started spending almost every evening networking, as she put it. Client dinners, industry events, launch parties, events I was never invited to, events where my groundedness would presumably be out of place. Her stories about Kevin became more frequent, always delivered with a forced casualness, always preceded by the disclaimer, "He's just a friend." Kevin was always there, helping her land a big client, staying late for a brainstorming session, celebrating a win. He was a shadow, an increasingly tangible presence in our apartment, even though he was never actually there. I found myself battling a rising tide of suspicion. My eyes would drift to her phone when she left it on the counter, unlocked for a fleeting moment. A part of me wanted to snatch it, to look, to confirm or deny the ugly thoughts churning in my mind. But I always stopped myself, hating the person I was becoming, the person who would violate trust like that. Yet, the thoughts persisted. I remembered once, early on, when I'd suggested, half-jokingly, that I should meet this omnipresent Kevin. Her reaction had been instant, defensive. "You wouldn't like him," she'd said, a little too quickly. "He's very corporate." The memory stung now. The distance between us had widened into a chasm. Our physical intimacy, once a comfort, a quiet language we shared, had waned to a hollow routine, if it happened at all. Her touch felt fleeting, her kisses brief and lacking warmth. We moved around each other like strangers occupying the same space, the silence between us heavy with unspoken things. Then came the night that solidified my fears. Grace came home late, past midnight, the usual time she'd return from her late work meetings. She'd typically leave her keys on the small table by the door, kick off her shoes, and head straight to bed, tired and ready for sleep. But this night, there was a faint, unfamiliar scent clinging to her. Not her perfume, not mine, not the smell of the office, but a distinct masculine cologne, expensive and sharp. It wasn't overpowering, just subtle, noticeable. "Crowded elevator," she mumbled when I asked, my voice carefully neutral. She waved her hand dismissively, already halfway to the bedroom, not even bothering to look at me. The dismissal cut deeper than any argument could have. The next morning, I was searching frantically for my phone charger. It was one of those small, frustrating moments when nothing is where it should be. I remembered Grace had been wearing her navy blazer the night before, the one with the deep pockets. I found it slung over a chair in the dining room, still carrying the faint scent of that unfamiliar cologne. I plunged my hand into the pocket, hoping to find my charger. My fingers brushed against a thin piece of paper. It was a receipt. My blood ran cold as I pulled it out. It was from the bar at the Fauché Tower, one of the fanciest hotels downtown, dated 2 nights prior, for 2 expensive cocktails. Grace had told me she was working late at the office that night, not at a high-end hotel bar, not having cocktails. My hands started to tremble, the paper crinkling in my grasp. The name of the bar, the date, the items, it was all there, stark and undeniable. I walked into the kitchen where she was making coffee, the receipt crumpled in my hand. She looked up, startled by the sound of my footsteps. Her eyes, usually so composed, flickered with something unreadable. "What's this, Grace?" My voice was thin, reedy, barely my own. I held out the crumpled paper. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, a fleeting cold contact. Her gaze dropped to the receipt, and I watched as the color drained from her face. She stammered for a moment, then swallowed hard. "It was a work meeting that ran late, Mark. Just a quick drink." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "With Kevin?" I asked, the name a raw wound in my throat. My voice was shaking now, a tremor I couldn't control. She just stood there, stirring her coffee, her back to me, avoiding my gaze completely. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I spent the rest of that morning in a fog, my mind racing through possibilities, each one more painful than the last. The scent of cologne, the late nights, the whispers, the guarded phone, the deflections, the lies. It all clicked into place, an ugly, undeniable picture forming in my head. I knew then that I had to confirm my fears, no matter how much it hurt, no matter what it cost me. This quiet man, used to the measured calm of the ICU, felt a storm brewing inside him, a cold fury that was entirely new. The next morning felt like walking through thick mud. I went through the motions, ate a silent breakfast, watched Grace get ready for work, her movements precise, almost mechanical. The air in the apartment was heavy, suffocating. I waited until I heard the faint click of the door closing, the soft thud of her footsteps receding down the hall. Then I went straight to her laptop in the spare bedroom. I knew her password. It was our anniversary, a date that now felt like a cruel joke. The screen lit up, a blinding white. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type, the tremor making my fingers slip on the keys. I opened her messaging app, the icon a familiar blue. There they were, her conversations with Kevin. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't just colleagues discussing work. They were intimate, detailing clandestine meetings, late-night texts, pet names, even whispered plans for the future. Each word was a fresh wound. My world didn't just crack, it imploded. I scrolled through weeks, months of messages, each one a testament to a truth I had been trying so hard to deny. My vision blurred. I couldn't breathe. Then I saw it, a message that confirmed everything, ripping away the last fragile shred of hope I might have clung to. Can't wait to see you tonight, my love. Mark is working late, so we'll have the place to ourselves. The date on that message was the same night I'd found the hotel bar receipt. The same night she'd blamed the cologne on a crowded elevator. A profound physical pain erupted in my chest, a sharp, cold stab. It wasn't a metaphor. It felt like something was truly tearing inside me. The steady rhythm of my own heart seemed to falter, then pound with a frantic, desperate beat. I was an ICU nurse. I knew what a heart attack felt like. This was close. I stood there, feeling the cold air from the window on my face, letting the shock wash over me. Then a strange clarity settled. I moved mechanically, connecting the laptop to the printer. The whirring sound filled the silent apartment as sheet after sheet slid out, a chilling testament to her betrayal, to the meticulously constructed lies. I printed a stack, enough to feel substantial, enough to be undeniable. It was an ugly pile of paper, but it was proof. I spent the day in a haze, the apartment feeling alien, contaminated. I don't remember what I did, only that I was waiting for her to come home. The hours stretched into an eternity. The sun set, plunging the room into twilight. I didn't turn on any lights. When Grace finally came through the door that evening, her key turning quietly in the lock, the apartment was dark, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She walked in, taking off her coat, sensing something was wrong. She saw me sitting on the sofa, silhouetted against the dim light from the street lamp outside. Then her eyes fell to the coffee table. The stack of printed messages, stark white against the dark wood. "What's this, Grace?" My voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a stranger's voice. Her face, usually so composed, drained of all color. Her eyes widened, flickered from the papers to me, then back to the papers. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Mark," she finally stammered, her voice a thin whisper. "I can explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off, my voice rising, though still controlled. "Explain that you've been lying to me for months? That Kevin isn't just a friend? That you've been bringing him into our home?" The words felt like bitter ash in my mouth. Grace broke down then, her composure finally crumbling. She sank onto the armchair, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with sobs. She confessed everything, the words tumbling out in a rush, desperate, pleading. "It meant nothing, Mark. It was a mistake. I swear, I don't know why I did it." But her words, even through her tears, sounded hollow to me, a performance I had heard too many times in the ICU, promises of recovery that never materialized. A deep, chilling rage simmered beneath the surface, but the pain was stronger, a crushing weight that left no room for anger. I can't look at you, I told her, my voice barely audible. The apartment felt too small, too filled with her lies. I couldn't breathe the same air as her. I'm leaving, I said, the words heavy and final. I can't stay here. I can't stay with you. If you're wondering how life's costly choices unfold, stick around to the end to see how the story continues. I packed a single bag that night, methodically folding clothes, stuffing in toiletries, my movements steady despite the tremor in my hands. Grace was a frantic blur moving around me, pleading, crying, her words a jumble of apologies and promises. Please, Mark, don't do this, she cried, her voice raw, trying to physically block my path to the door. I just looked through her, past her, my gaze fixed on some distant point. Her touch felt repulsive, her tears empty. I walked out, the click of the lock behind me echoing the finality of my decision. The first few nights were spent in a nameless hotel, the sterile beige walls offering no comfort. Then I found this temporary apartment, sparsely furnished, a blank slate that mirrored the emptiness inside me. The ensuing weeks were a blur of grief, anger, and the crushing weight of betrayal. Sleep was elusive, haunted by images of Grace and Kevin, replaying conversations, piecing together the timeline of her lies. Food tasted like ash. My world had fractured, and I was navigating the debris. Grace didn't give up easily. My phone buzzed constantly with her name, texts arriving at all hours. I love you, Mark. Please, just give me another chance. I'll do anything to make it right. I miss you. I miss us. It was a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. I'm so sorry. I'm lost without you. I ignored most of them, though each notification was a tiny jolt, a reminder of the pain. I tried to sever the cord completely, to go numb, to build walls higher than ever before. My friends and family were supportive, offering comforting words, meals, a listening ear, but their kindness couldn't penetrate the profound loneliness that had settled deep within me. It was an isolation that came from within, a feeling that no one could truly understand the depth of this betrayal. I started therapy, a quiet, unassuming woman named Dr. Evelyn Hayes, who sat across from me, listening patiently. It was slow, agonizing work, trying to process the trauma, to untangle the knotted threads of my shattered sense of self. The image of Grace with Kevin haunted me relentlessly. Not just the physical image, but the idea of them, laughing, sharing secrets, building a life that was meant to be mine. It played on a loop in my mind, a cruel, endless reel. I tried to focus on work, immersing myself in the relentless demands of the ICU. But even saving lives, once my anchor felt distant, abstract. The cries of pain, the quiet desperation of families, the precise rhythm of CPR. It all felt like a performance I was watching from afar. The notion of just showing up, my simple mantra, felt impossible when my own life was in ruins, when the ground beneath me had given way. One particularly cold, gray afternoon, as I sat staring out the window of my temporary apartment, watching the bare branches of a tree sway in the wind, a quiet, insistent thought began to form. It wasn't born of raw emotion. Not exactly. It was colder, sharper. Grace and Kevin. They had acted with such disregard, such casual cruelty. They deserved to face consequences. Not just the quiet internal consequences of their actions, but something tangible, something that would reverberate in their carefully constructed worlds. I thought about Grace, her fierce ambition, her meticulous curation of her public image. Perception is everything, she'd said. The words came back to me, clear and chilling. The idea of public exposure of her carefully built professional facade crumbling sparked something within me. Not anger, not vengeance, not exactly. Something colder, a quiet, calculated resolve. The quiet resolve that had settled over me spurred action. I started with Kevin Jenkins, a quick search online, his name paired with Rising Star Advertising, and his social media profiles popped up. There he was, Kevin, smiling, impeccably dressed, radiating confidence. And next to him, in almost every picture, was a woman, Sarah, his wife. Two young children, a boy and a girl, completed the picture of a seemingly happy, successful family. They were at a pumpkin patch at a local park in front of a Christmas tree. My gaze lingered on Sarah's face, her smile genuine, her eyes warm. A fresh wave of cold, determined resolve washed over me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Sarah, too. I hesitated for a moment, the echo of my own morality whispering in the back of my mind. Was this right? Was I stooping to their level? But the pain of betrayal was too raw, too deep. The image of Grace in Kevin's arms, the casual cruelty of their lies, outweighed any lingering doubt. She deserved to know, I thought, the words a silent declaration. Sarah deserved the truth. Finding Sarah's email wasn't difficult. Kevin's LinkedIn profile listed her as a senior manager at a local marketing firm. A quick search of that firm's website yielded an email address. I drafted a cautious message, deleted it, and started over. I wanted to be direct, but I also wanted to offer her control, to let her choose how to proceed. Dear Sarah Jenkins, I typed, the words feeling formal, heavy. My name is Mark Anderson. I have some information about your husband, Kevin Jenkins, that I believe you deserve to know. I understand this may come as a shock, and I apologize for the abruptness of this message, but I felt it was important to reach out directly. I would be willing to meet you in person at a neutral public location to share this information. Please feel free to reach out if you wish to discuss further. I reread it, scrutinizing each word, ensuring it conveyed gravity without being accusatory or emotional. It felt cold, factual, perfect. I sent it. Her response came surprisingly quickly, just a few hours later. Her tone was guarded, understandably, but undeniably curious. Mr. Anderson, it began, I received your email. I'm available tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at the Corner Cafe downtown. Please confirm if that time works. It worked. I sat across from Sarah at the small, round table in the Corner Cafe, the scent of roasting coffee beans filling the air. She was thinner than I expected from her photos, her eyes a tired blue. She wore a simple silver wedding band. I felt a mix of apprehension and a grim determination. She looked at me, her expression a careful blankness. I didn't waste time with small talk. I calmly laid out the evidence, placing the stack of printed messages on the table between us. I explained Grace's role, the timeline, the lies, the cologne, the hotel receipt. My voice was steady, factual, detached, almost clinical. I spoke as I would to a family member in the ICU, delivering difficult news with clarity and without unnecessary emotion. Sarah's face, initially pale with shock, gradually hardened. Her blue eyes, which had held a flicker of hope, now filled with a cold, slow-burning anger. She picked up a few of the printouts, her fingers tracing the damning words. She didn't cry. She just sat there, absorbing each detail, her jaw tight. The quiet strength in her silence was palpable. Finally, she looked up, her gaze meeting mine. Thank you for telling me, she said, her voice barely a whisper, thick with unspoken pain. What are we going to do? The question wasn't if, but what. It was a shared understanding, a silent pact formed in the space between two broken people. We expose them, I said, my voice low, firm, where it hurts them the most, professionally and socially. Grace's perception is everything speech echoed in my mind. Kevin's picture-perfect family. This was how they measured success, how they built their lives. We would dismantle it piece by piece. Together we concocted a plan. It would be a dinner party, a seemingly innocent gathering of couples. The stage would be set. The curtain would rise. The plan was set in motion. Sarah invited Kevin and Grace to a friendly dinner at her home the following Saturday. Kevin, oblivious to the storm brewing, readily agreed, probably thinking it was a chance for a casual gathering, a little professional mingling. Grace, too, accepted, having received what she believed was an olive branch from me, a tentative step toward reconciliation. She'd called, sounding hesitant, asking if I was free. Sure, Grace, I'd said, my voice carefully neutral. Sarah invited me too. I guess we're all adults here, right? My words were a hook, and she bit. The evening arrived, heavy with unspoken tension. I sat at Sarah's dining table across from Grace, with Kevin beside her. The silverware clinked against the plates, a hollow sound. Kevin was jovial, perhaps a little too loud, making jokes, trying to fill the strained silence. Grace was nervous, I could tell. Her hands, usually so steady, fidgeted with her napkin. She avoided my gaze, focused intently on her plate. The conversation felt forced, filled with polite but shallow small talk about work projects, the weather, anything to avoid substance. After the main course, Sarah brought out a cheesecake she'd baked herself. She placed it carefully on the table, then cleared her throat. The sound cut through the air, sharp and deliberate. "Kevin, Grace," she began, her voice steady, though a tremor was barely perceptible beneath the surface. "There's something Mark and I need to share with you." The air in the room thickened. Kevin stopped mid-sentence, a forkful of cheesecake halfway to his mouth, his smile slowly fading. Grace's head snapped up, her eyes finally meeting mine, a dawning horror in their green depths. I didn't hesitate. I calmly, almost clinically, presented the evidence. I pulled out the stack of printed text messages from my blazer pocket, laid them on the table. Then the hotel bar receipt placed precisely on top. "Grace, Kevin," I stated, my voice steady, clear, each word measured. "You two have been having an affair." The room fell silent, utter, complete silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Kevin's face went from confusion to utter horror, the color draining from his cheeks, leaving him a sickly gray. He looked at the messages, then at Grace, then back at the messages, his mouth agape. Grace paled, then flushed a deep, shaming crimson. She shrank in her chair as if trying to disappear. Sarah, her voice trembling but firm, confronted Kevin. "How could you, Kevin? Our children, our family? Everything we built?" Her words were not a question, but an accusation laced with a pain that was raw and profound. Kevin tried to speak, but no sound came out. Grace, finally finding her voice, tried to deny, to deflect. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, looking from Sarah to me, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. "It was nothing, a mistake." But the evidence laid bare on the table was overwhelming. Her words sounded hollow, desperate. The dinner devolved into chaos. Shouting, tears, accusations hurled across the table like daggers. Mark watched it all unfold, a strange sense of detachment settling over him. He felt both hollow and vindicated. The air was thick with the stench of betrayal and shattered trust. Kevin, unable to face the accusations, abruptly pushed back his chair, the screech echoing in the room, and fled the house, slamming the front door behind him. Sarah's anguished cries followed him, a sound that would haunt me for a long time. Grace, left alone with me, turned on me then, her eyes blazing with a mixture of shame and fury. "You snake, Mark! How could you do this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. I just met her gaze, offered no response. Nothing more needed to be said. I walked out, leaving the wreckage behind, leaving the shattered pieces of their lives and mine scattered across the dining room table. I drove away into the quiet Midwestern night, the only sound the hum of my tires on the asphalt, the only feeling a cold, weary emptiness. 3 months later, I sit here in my temporary apartment, the echo of empty rooms slowly beginning to feel like home. I reflect on my actions that night. Am I entirely proud? No, the vengeful part of me felt a grim satisfaction, but the man who once believed in just showing up felt a quiet unease. But I'm no longer broken. The constant ache of betrayal has dulled. I'm learning to heal, to find my way again, one quiet, resolute step at a time. The compass tattoo on Grace's wrist comes to mind, a faint memory. Maybe in exposing her, I had, in a strange way, begun to find my own direction again. 3 months have passed since the night I walked out. The temporary apartment, with its neutral walls and rented furniture, still doesn't quite feel like home, but the empty rooms are slowly starting to resonate with a different kind of quiet. I'm not entirely proud of how things unfolded at that dinner table, of the cold, calculated revenge. It wasn't the noble, steady response I might have once imagined for myself. But then again, there was nothing noble in her betrayal. The bitter taste of those events still lingers, a faint echo of the chaos. Yet the crushing weight has lifted. The constant ache has dulled to a manageable throb. I'm learning to breathe again, to find my own rhythm without the relentless drumming of her ambition or the insidious whisper of her lies. The compass tattoo meant to keep her from losing her way feels less like a mockery now and more like a symbol of my own journey. I'm charting a new course, one quiet, resolute step at a time, moving towards a future I'll build for myself, honest and true.